I don't really know what an Everton player looks like, to be honest, because to Rafael Benítez, an Everton player looks like Andros Townsend or Salman Rondon. To Carlo Ancelotti, it was James Rodriguez.
Hi guys, thanks for joining us as always. And on this episode, we're going to be talking about Everton, because what a bruising defeat they suffered at home to Liverpool on Wednesday night. It was the heaviest home defeat they have experienced in 39 years. It looks like their season could be unravelling already, with pressure on the players, the manager, the board. The fans are not happy, and so we're going to look into a bit of all of that. Thanks very much to Paddy Boyland, one of the Athletic's Everton correspondents, for joining us now. And we're going to try and trace here who is to blame for this and where it goes next. So, Paddy, let's begin with the board, because crucially on Wednesday night, the fans turned their anger on them, the hierarchy. Are they responsible for this mess?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And like you say, there has been a bit of a sea change in recent weeks. I think most of the ire up to now is focused on Rafael Benítez. He's kind of an easy figure to point blame at, particularly because there's not much of a connection between him and the fans. Former Liverpool manager, quite an easy stick to beat him with, I think. But what we've seen in recent times has been a shift, I'd say, towards significant focus on the board now. The people like the chairman, Bill Kenwright, the director of football, Marcel Brands, who sits on the board. I was at Brentford on Sunday for Everton's defeat against them. The atmosphere in the away end was toxic that day, probably about as toxic as it's been for some time. And the derby game against Liverpool at Goodison was a continuation of that. There were angry confrontation, supporters angrily confronting Brands and Kenwright after the game. And I suppose in this big blame game, who is responsible for Everton's woes? The answer is probably everybody and nobody at the same time. I think that failures have kind of gone right across the board, right across the club. And while Benitez may not be the sole person responsible, he needs to harbour some of that as well. So yeah, I do think the board are taking some flack now, in some cases deserved flack, for the governance of the club. At present, it does not look like a well-run club. They have issues with FFP, and as a result, were able to spend very little money over the summer. Benitez had just 1.7 million as his summer budget, and that's symptomatic, I think, of wider trends at the football club. So I think he's been hamstrung, and I think, again, you have to go right to the top if you want to answer that question.
Well, let's do that then, because you mentioned the low spend last summer, but actually Everton have spent £500 million in the period since 2016. Of course, the owner, Farhad Moshiri, is in charge of this operation. There's also influence from Alisher Usmanov, it would seem, but for all intents and purposes, Farhad Moshiri is the boss. He was not in attendance for the Liverpool game. He has chopped and changed between managers. He's spent a lot of money. Depending on who you listen to, he has had quite a strong influence when it comes to recruitment itself. He has quite a few voices and influences around him. So what will he be thinking right now? And I guess as a fan base, you can't really tell the boss to walk away. So will he be feeling the pressure?
I think he will be feeling the pressure. Moshiri's obviously pumped an awful lot of money into Everton Football Club since he arrived. And the intentions are positive. The intentions are good. He's trying to move them on the pitch and off it. So there's a new stadium in the pipeline. That's an immensely positive thing. I suppose the frustration is that all the money that's been pumped into the playing side of things hasn't really got Everton anywhere. Moshiri arrived in 2016 with Everton sort of treading water in mid-table. Well, the best you could say for them right now, after that outlay of 500 million, is that they're doing that. Some would argue that they're not even treading water in mid-table at the moment. The defeat against Liverpool was six defeats in their last 7. The fixture list in December looks really quite bleak when you factor in the home game against Arsenal, trips to Palace and Chelsea, a home game against Leicester. That's a really difficult fixture list for any side, never mind a beleaguered Everton. So Moshiri will be feeling the strain, probably got away with it a little bit because he wasn't in attendance for the Merseyside derby. So most of the frustration was directed at predominantly Kenwright and Brands. some of it also obviously seeped through, and Benitez got it in the neck a little bit as well. But like I say, I think the big picture here is now that fans are waking up to the fact that Everton haven't really gone anywhere under his stewardship, and even further back in time as well.
You also mentioned Marcel Brands, the director of football, and there is so much talk around his role. I think his contract has been extended. He's got a big reputation in European football, but also there has been so much criticism of recruitment at Everton over these last few years, appointment of managers as well, and everything that comes with that, from recruitment to staffing changes to tactical plans on the pitch. And really, that should be the role of a director of football, technical director, sporting director, to oversee. But from people I speak to in the game, it's not clear how much influence he does have. Some people say he's to blame for this and it's all been on his watch. Others say he's got his hands tied and he's excellent at his job, but he doesn't have any autonomy to actually do it as he's done it elsewhere. So give us the lowdown on Marcel Brands, and is his position in jeopardy?
Ordinarily, a director of football would have a heavy role in recruiting a new manager, in player recruitment, and Brands is involved in these conversations, but quite evidently doesn't seem to have the final decisive say. I think he was probably at his zenith at Everton when Marco Silva was around, and they were able to liaise on deals for players like Luca Dean, Richarlison. They were on the page a lot over transfer targets, and it was very much seen as building a product from the ground up, a project, I should say, from the ground up. But what Everton have done in recent years, they pivoted towards, I'd say, more old school managers like somebody like Benitez, who demands a large say in recruitment. I think the product of that is that maybe Marcel Brands starts to be a little bit squeezed around the fringes. Now, when you speak to people about Everton's deals and the transfers they've done, the things that haven't come off, one of the things that always comes back is that people are dealing with different figures at the club. So one player may come from one source, but another player may be from the recruitment arm. Now, Brands and the head of recruitment, Greta Steinson, they scout players throughout the year with their own recruitment operation. But you look at the summer window and Andros Townsend came in, Demarai Gray came in. Our understanding is that these were basically Rafael Benítez picks and not Marcel Brands picks. So I think you've got a director of football in name, but potentially not always in remit, if we're being really honest here.
Well, finally, it's very easy to forget how well Everton started, and many people were raving about the signings of Demarai Gray and Andros Townsend. But others were not having Rafael Benítez, as we saw, because of his Liverpool background. The Everton fans were protesting, and that put him on a back foot for many. And there are people that didn't like that recruitment. Even though he was only working on a small budget, he only turned to players largely that he had known and worked with before, and actually would have been quite keen to sign even more of them. So it presents a very fractured picture. I even think, as an outsider, how Moise Kean was signed to quite a lot of fanfare, touted as one of the best young strikers in European football, playing for Italy, and scoring goals for Paris Saint-Germain on loan last season. And Dominic Calvert-Lewin gets injured. Everton don't have a striker, and they've not got somebody at their disposal that they signed. And I guess that again strikes at this sense of chaos and crisis and a lack of aligned thinking on and off the pitch. So I just wanted a final thought from you on where Everton go from here. Do you think it's going to spiral out of control, or do you think they've got the right people and processes in place to get their act together and at least salvage something of their season as they progress towards that ultimate goal and the new stadium?
Yeah, so the noises from Everton as of today, after the Merseyside derby, are that they are prepared to give Benitez more time to put this right. There's an acceptance that he's been hamstrung in the transfer market, but has also had his hands tied with injuries as well. I just feel as though, as I said earlier, failings are so widespread and it implicates so many people that, let's say for argument's sake, they were to sacrifice Benitez in 2 to 3 weeks. I think he would actually only be a sacrificial lamb. Most of the problems would still remain. You'd still have kind of muddled recruitment. You'd still have a squad that's weak in some areas, so-so in others. And you'd still need to overhaul the playing staff with a minimal budget because of FFP constraints. So I actually think we need to continue looking at the big picture. Benitez's sacking would feel like an easy win. I think it would get some fans back on board somewhat, and it might buy the board a bit of time. But I suppose the question Everton fans are asking now is, do the board actually deserve more time? My personal opinion is that Everton have lurched from one style to the other in kind of 12 to 18 month cycles. So even going back to Moshiri, the start of Moshiri's reign, he sacked Roberto Martinez fairly early doors, but they've had Ronald Koeman, Sam Allardyce, Carlo Ancelotti, Rafael Benítez, interim managers as well in Duncan Ferguson and David Unsworth. Nothing really unites any of those managers, and they all bring in 2 to 3, maybe 4 even of their own players. So you're left with a fragmented squad that's looking to do a load of different things, but not competent to do one thing above all else. And Everton absolutely have to find a way of breaking that chain. They need some stability. They need to get back to the basics, finding a structure for recruitment and for succession planning with managers. That means that they're able to instill and implement a style over a long period of time. I don't really know what an Everton player looks like, to be honest, because to Rafael Benítez, an Everton player looks like Andros Townsend or Salman Rondon. To Carlo Ancelotti, it was James Rodriguez. This is in the space of 12 months. That's completely disparate, and I think that strikes at the core of why Everton are struggling right now. The clubs that spend money and don't do well are the clubs that are not performing well off the pitch as well. So I think big questions now need to be asked of the Everton hierarchy, as well as Benitez in some cases.
Well, it's a sorry state of affairs, but thank you for such a comprehensive breakdown. And Everton fans will hope, beyond hope, that it picks up and there's a glimmer of light ahead. Thank you very much for your time. We'll stay across it, and in particular, you and Greg O'Keefe on The Athletic will too.